things relating to that, sheep. Everything's about sheep. So you build spinning wheels, because what do you do with the wool? You spin it, right? So everything involves sheep there, and you have those houses that aren't built to last, but they're good enough. Down here in, so this sort of peninsula here is called East Anglia, and it's Norfolk and Suffolk. And that area is, among other things, where they built the Royal Navy, the ships of the line. Early versions, I mean, we're only talking the 1600s here, so not that, like, not Nelson ships or anything, but pretty big, substantial ships. And so the people who are building those ships are also building houses. And so we have 3 people who lived in Dedham in 1637 who are from East Anglia and were house builders, or house wrights as they would call them. Thomas Fisher, he's from Suffolk, and he built the first town hall. And some reports say he also helped build the first schoolhouse, which actually Dedham's schoolhouse is the first publicly funded schoolhouse on this continent. But whatever he did, he was halfway through helping build, being in charge of building the town hall. He was halfway through that in 1637, then he fell off and died. So there's no way he was involved in building the Fairbanks house. These other 2 guys are much more likely candidates. In fact, it's possible both of them were involved. John Roper and John Kingsbury, both from, you see one's from Norfolk, one's from Suffolk, so they're both from East Anglia, and they're both accomplished house builders. So it's probably one of these 2 guys who built the Fairbanks house. And so this picture here is actually kind of an interesting tangent. In 1980, we got together with the MFA, Plymouth Plantation, a few other organizations. They were celebrating,
New England Begins.
Yeah, that. New England Begins. I forgot the name. Thank you for remembering. So anyway, as part of New England Begins, they built a 1-to-1 replica of the original portion of the house on Boston Common. And they built it with all the traditional materials, traditional tools. Apparently by the end of it, every one of these shirtless guys you can see had infected sores all over their hands from the splinters. So anyway, that's why we treat wood now. But anyway, they made a 1-to-1 reproduction of the Fairbanks house on Boston Common, and of just the original portion. So if you guys have been to the current Fairbanks house, you know it was built up over the years. So this was recreating just the 1637 part of the house. So you can see how sturdy that is, right? There's a lot to that building. Now, that happens to have a lot in common with the ships they're building. So you have, this is a diagram of the Fairbanks house. This is a diagram of a standard ship from the time period. And you can see some similarities. And you can see how sturdy both of them, and particularly if you flip the boat over, all of a sudden they look pretty similar, right? It's the exact same techniques, the exact same styles, just upside down. That's how they built the Fairbanks house, and that's how they build ships. So yeah, you have this very, very sturdy construction style. There's a few things other than just the sheer quantity of beams and posts, or ribs as they're called in the ship. There's the way they're, I forgot I was going to talk about this. So, yeah, so those 2 guys are from East Anglia. You can see John Roper's lives down here. Kingsbury, I think is just off this map. He's like right over here. So they're both, local. And then they build the Fairbanks house right here on what is now the intersection of East and Eastern. And so this is actually the way everybody's house would have been built the same way. Because these are the architects, or the carpenters we have here are these East Anglian people. So everybody's got a really nice, sturdy house that can survive some New England weather. So why is it only the Fairbanks that's still standing? Well, I always like to say there are 3 reasons the Fairbanks is still here. So it's incredibly well built to begin with. The family from a very early time had a strong belief that their house was important and should be preserved. And third, and probably most important, blind luck. There's never been a major fire in the Fairbanks house, never had a tree fall over onto it during a hurricane. Even the family's misfortunes actually led to some silver linings. So I'm pretty sure I've mentioned previous talks, and will definitely come up in some of our talks later in the summer, about how right around 1801, several members of the Fairbanks family put in a good effort to ruin the family's reputation and fortune in one go. The following generation had no money. Well, they happened to be in the mid-1800s. That's the Victorian era. Victorians are into bigger, better, newer, fancier. Who cares if it's older? Historic, tear it down, build a nicer one. Well, while everybody else is doing that, the Fairbanks can just barely maintain the house they already have. So the house stays very much intact through that time period while everybody else is upgrading.
I feel like after saying all those things that haven't happened, you should probably knock on some of that wood over there.
So far, so good, right? And so, yeah, this is the original portion of the house, the part in the red here. That's the original 1637 portion. They add this back portion here first, the lean-to, 1650s thereabouts, 1690s, they add the west wing, and then stays like that, just these three parts for about 100 years until 1790, they add the east wing. Main reason they do that is there's over 15 people living in the house by that point, a little crowded. So we had the east wing, and then shortly after that, we had these three small additions, an expansion to the parlor, a second entryway, and a cheese closet that will eventually become a privy. But anyway, that original portion, highlighted in the red, built by John Roper and or John Kingsbury, and we don't know the masons. So these guys were carpenters, they built things with wood. The chimney was built by a mason. We have no idea who that guy was. We do know the bricks in the chimney, and by the way, there are 40,000 of them in the main chimney. We estimate somewhere in that. So there's 3 fireplaces, 40,000 bricks, and they are assembled from bricks made of local clay. We do know that. They've been chemically tested. It is local clay. And that means it's from one of 2 places. Dedham does eventually have a clay pit where they could get the clay to make this kind of brick, but we're not sure when it was actually established. If it's around in 1637, they definitely got their clay from there. If it's not around yet in 1637, the next closest clay pit is in what's now Quincy, so not too far. So the bricks in the chimney came from at farthest Quincy. The wood is all local, probably harvested right in Dedham. In fact, in that original 1637 building, there is only one part of it that is imported from England. That is the glass in the windows. Even though Boston's been around for about 7 years, glass is really hard to make. It requires a pretty substantial infrastructure to get to the point where you can make glass. So that's still being imported, particularly if you want the good stuff. And the Fairbanks were fairly wealthy, and they could afford the good stuff.
Excuse me.
Yeah, of course.
Would the masonry be done first or after the?
In tandem, actually. So what you're gonna, the first thing, of course, you're going to, well, actually, let's talk about how the Fairbanks did it. So 1636 fall, so I think September, October, the Fairbanks are officially admitted into the town of Dedham. And Dedham was a gated community back then. You had to be approved by the town council to move into Dedham. So they're approved in the early fall. It's not enough time to build a house, right? These guys are good, but they're not that good because you have to build before the ground freezes because you're not going to do anything once the ground freezes. So the Fairbanks would stay with another family over that winter. And that was actually a tradition. The newest family always stays with the previous newest family. So the Fairbanks stayed with whoever was before them, and then once the Fairbanks house was built, the next people to move in stayed with them until their house was built, and so on. So you always end up hosting the next new family in town. So anyway, they spend their summer, or winter rather, of 36, 37 with another family, we don't know which one. But over the course of that winter, they're going to move all the timbers they need. Because with really, really large timbers, and we're going to talk about just how huge some of these were in just a moment, with that, they're actually easier to move with a sled than they are with a cart. So you actually want the snow to be on the ground while you're moving all the materials, because it's easier. So everything's in place. As soon as the ground thaws in spring of 37, they start building. First thing would be the foundation, what we would call crawl space sized space under the house. And then in the center of that is the chimney. And so that's going to be built up sort of like as the other guys are building the wood structure, he's building the chimney. And actually, if you go to the house, which of course I encourage you to do, you will see that the chimney and the wood structure are actually integrated. There are parts where the beams and stuff go into the chimney. So there's bits where the chimney's over and under, and so it's all integrated. So it's all built together, which is another thing that makes it so sturdy. So you have that chimney is very much like a keystone. It's holding up the wood structure around it, and the wood structure is holding up the chimney. So it's a really amazing design. And so by the fall of 1637, those guys have been working, all spring and summer, and they finished the house, and the Fairbanks can move in before the winter of 37. So they work fast.
But they must have had people helping.
Oh yeah, no, they. When I say John Roper and John Kingsbury are the carpenters, I mean those are the master carpenters. They're the guys in charge. They have a full team of apprentices, indentured servants, and just general hired help that are doing all the hard work. But they're the guys who design it, know where everything goes, make sure everything's lined up right. But yeah, they're going to have a whole team of people. So the Fairbanks likely helped build the house, but they are not the builders. They're not the people in charge of building the house. And then, like I said, apprentices and indentured servants and the like.
But I've read that there were only 30 families here then.
Well, that does not include things like servants and slaves and lower class people. When they say 30 families, it means 30 families that have land and a house. So all of their servants and stuff are not being included in that.
I see.
Yeah. And all of them would probably, all the ones that can afford, well, they're granted land when they come into Dedham, but if they can afford to move to Dedham, they can afford servants. So like I said, the Fairbanks today, we would call them firmly upper middle class. They're not like the 1% or anything, but they are fairly wealthy. And actually by the 1640s, the Fairbanks are, based on tax records, the third wealthiest family in town. So yeah, all these major families have servants. A few of them do have slaves. It is still legal in the 1600s in Massachusetts. But the Fairbanks are doing fairly well in those early years, and that's why they can do things like add the lean-to and So a little bit about how all this is put together. So one of the things that makes the house so strong is there are no nails holding it together. So nails do hold the walls, floors, and ceilings onto the frame of the house, but they do not hold the frame together. Instead, the frame is put together like this. Every joint, every place a post and beam or a column or anything like that meets another one, they do so like this. They're hand carved, so that they have sort of a tab and the tenon and mortise, and they fit together like pieces in a giant puzzle. So again, every joint in the house, every connection between two pieces of wood in the house connects like this. And then they're held together not with nails, but with wooden pegs. So this makes the construction incredibly sturdy. So with any kind of construction, your weakest point is anything made of a different material. And that was particularly true of old iron nails. So why do we use steel instead of iron? Yeah, rust, right? So they didn't have steel yet, so your nails are going to rust. A rusty nail rots out the wood around it, does not in any way help your structural integrity. The other thing is they used actually a green wood. So today you never use wood, you don't cut down a tree and immediately build a house with it. You let it age, you let it dry, so that way you find if there's any cracks or warps in it, you're going to find it before you build with it. They didn't do that. They built right away with stuff harvested in less than a year before they use it to build. Now, that can cause some problems, and there are a few beams, we have evidence that a few beams had to be replaced fairly early on. But for the most part, what that means is if you're putting all this wood together while it's still green, as it dries, it shrinks, and as it shrinks, it binds. And so if you put this together while it's still green, this is going to be an incredibly tight, strong joint that is not going anywhere. And so that is a big part of why the house is still up, is this construction style. Also the fact that this is entirely oak, predominantly white oak, a little bit of red oak mixed in. So the frame of your house is all oak, walls, floors, and ceilings were pine, And then the exterior, most of it was cedar shingles and clapboards. Even back then, they knew that cedar was bug resistant. Bugs hate cedar wood, so always the best thing to put on the outside of your house. So the larger joints would have 2 pegs, smaller ones would have one like this, but they're all held together that way. And some more elaborate than others, some of them more like 2 hands kind of going together, but most of them are going to be this one, one tab, one C, one mortise, one tin. So here's an example. It's not the best picture, but it's hard to get good pictures in the attic where there's no light. But you can actually see right here the two. These 2 things sticking out of the beam are pegs. So you have the main beam has a hole carved into it, and then the smaller one, the end of it's carved into a smaller bit that fits in. Pegs are driven through. That's holding the house together even today. The original pegs, the original beams, posts. Another example. This picture didn't come out very good. Sorry. But this is the summer beam in the hall, the main beam in the main room of the house. And you can actually see, if you look, it looks like there's just posts going up to a beam, and like they just meet flat. But if you look closely, you'll see that there's actually a gap where they've separated slightly over the centuries, and you can see that that too is the mortise and tenon construction. Now, another thing that helps the house is the sheer size of the materials they're using. This is a floorboard in the parlor. If you've been to the house, the first room you go into, the one that's sort of half a gift shop now, is the parlor. And this is a floorboard in that room. And you can see that it is 17.5 inches wide. It doesn't end there, though. That is what's called a radial cut board. That means it is only the radius, or half the width, of the tree it came from. And that's excluding the core wood. So you double that, right? And you add maybe 4 or 5 inches for the core wood. You add another 2-3 inches for the outer wood and the bark. This piece of wood came from a tree that was somewhere in the vicinity of 45 inches wide. And this board is easily 8 feet long. And so, yeah, there's a portion of the trunk that is straight and 45 inches wide. This is pine, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that takes hundreds of years to grow a pine tree that size. Yeah. So it was actually said in the 1600s, you could ride from the eastern seaboard to the Mississippi without ever getting off your horse. The lowest trees, the shortest trees were so tall that the lowest branches would clear your head on horseback. So you may be wondering, well, where are all these trees? They're not. They literally deforested the entire eastern seaboard in the 1617 and early 1800s. Aside from 2 old-growth forests, one in North Carolina, one in Georgia, there are no trees more than 200 years old east of the Mississippi. I mean, there's the occasional one-off on somebody's property or something like an old gnarly oak that's too weird to make anything out of. But other than those, yeah, you have those 2 groves. And those groves were not preserved by any, sense of preservation or anything. They're hard to get to. I tried to go to the one in North Carolina once, and it's a path like that wide with a sheer drop here and a sheer cliff here. And I was like, you know what? No, I don't need to see big trees that badly. And I certainly wouldn't want to try and harvest them that way. So, yeah, so anyway, huge pine trees everywhere. And that's what they're making these houses out of. But the government has a problem with that. The British royal government wants these trees shipped back to England. The whole reason they founded New England in the first place is because they had already deforested England, making the Royal Navy. They're out of wood, or at least wood good enough to build a ship out of. They want all this good stuff being shipped back to England to make more Navy ships. Then they find out that all the locals are using the best stuff in their houses. So they make laws in the 1680s saying that it's illegal to use wood over a certain size in house construction. The New Englanders, already being somewhat snarky about all this, even 100 years before the Revolution, start calling larger trees the king's pine, because, it's supposed to go to the king. What they quickly realized is that the inspectors that were going around looking to see if you were following the rules about the king's pine, those inspectors were in a hurry, and they only had time to check the first floor. So people kept using the good stuff on the second floor. But if you see wood this size on the first floor, that means it was built before the 1680s. So even before we could do dendrochronology on the summer beam and confirm scientifically that that was built 1637, we knew for a fact that it had to be built before the 1680s or it wouldn't have planks like this on the first floor. Another example, this is a wall board that's in the lean-to now. So it would have originally been an exterior wall that had clapboards mounted on top of it. Now it's a wall in the lean-to. This is another board that you can see is just shy of 16 inches wide. That's another radial cut board. So there's a lot of them in the house.
Yeah, what wood is it? That looks more
This-
like oak.
Yeah, where this was part of the outside, that's probably oak. Or maybe not oak, but definitely a harder wood than pine. So a little bit about the summer beam. Excuse the behind-the-scenes bit here. So the summer beam meets the lintel over the fireplace. So the summer beam rests on top of the lintel, and the lintel rests on top of the bricks of the fireplace. So like I said, the chimney and the wooden construction are integrated. So the lintel is a massive piece of wood, and you can see it is 114 inches long. It is 11 inches tall, and it is 16 inches wide. So think about, and they've cut off all the exterior wood, all the bark, and you're left with a tree.
One tree?
Yeah, that's one piece of wood that is 114 inches long, and the entire length of it is 11 by 16. Yeah. That is the largest single piece of wood in the house. It is more or less literally holding up everything else in the house, or at least on that side of the house. So that's the beam over the fireplace. So yeah, they don't make trees like that anymore.
And summer doesn't refer to the season, right?
Oh yes, good point. So yeah, I keep calling it the summer beam, that main beam down the middle of each room. It's actually a mangling of a French word that means load bearing. It has nothing to do with the season. But it is the main support for each side of the house. And this is the main support for the summer beam. So, yeah. Like I said, it all kind of builds together like a giant puzzle, house of cards sort of thing. Sort of both at the same time. Now, so you have the original house built in the 1637 and well taken care of by 8 generations of Fairbanks. And eventually we get to Rebecca, and she's the last one to live in the house. She moves out in 1904. Excuse me. With the help of a family called the Codmans, the Fairbanks family manages to establish a museum in 1904. They had already had their first family reunion in 1902. So actually the first 2 family reunions are while Rebecca's still living there. And she said something to the effect of, well, all these people say they're my cousins, but I don't know any of them. Anyway, so Rebecca's a fantastic character that we should probably just do a whole talk on at some point. But she's great. But after some convincing, she moves out of the house in 1904, and we become a museum. So even before we're a museum, the family knows this is something important, this is something we need to preserve, to protect. And now we're a museum all the way in 1904 when the ideas of conservation are just starting, really. We're already a museum and we're already taking care of the house. And so they get a curator, a guy named Henry Irving Fairbanks, and he's the first of many Fairbanks family curators. And I say curator, but it really is whatever Fairbanks family member feels like it gets to be curator. Until 1993, and at that point they hire a professional curator, and it's been a professional curator like myself ever since. But that means we have about 100 years of unprofessional curation before we get to professional curation. They've done a very good job, given that they didn't have official training. But it does mean we have to, Well, they were doing a lot to keep the house and restore it, and now we're both doing stuff to maintain the original parts and to fix their fixes, because that happens at every historic house, not just us. Now, one major incident happened in the 1960s. Teenager was driving his car through the East Street and Eastern Ave intersection. The brakes on his car, on his 57 Chevy, failed. He swerved and went straight through a wooden fence and through the wall of the east wing of the Fairbanks house. This thing here with the stuff dripped out, that's a piano. He came to rest about a foot from the piano. And so luckily he managed to completely avoid any major support beams. Went right between them. Yeah. But you can see he did a lot of damage to the wall and stuff. And so they repaired it all. And they decided, we think that they looked at their repairs and realized they didn't match the stuff that was already there. So rather than trying to get a proper patina or try to find proper materials, they put wallpaper over it. And they picked the nicest, oldest looking wallpaper the 1960s had to offer. And it looked like this. So you see these. So I actually had a lady last year, giving her family a tour. We get into the East Wing. She looks around, gets really excited, and says, "I have the exact same wallpaper in my kitchen." So that's what it looked like until last week. We actually had a restoration group called Blackburn come in and get rid of this ugly 1960s wallpaper. And so this is the finished product. Looks a little better now. A little more historically accurate too. So you can see they stripped all the wallpaper. They stained that wood so that it does match the other stuff without needing wallpaper to cover it up. So it looks quite a bit better. I am going to put the paintings and stuff back up. I just haven't had a chance yet.
Where did the car come through?
So it came with pretty much it. The hood ornament would have gone clean through this window. It came through here, and like I said, came to rest about there. Another example, so here's another angle of the same room. You can see the same ugly wallpaper everywhere, and then what it looks like now. So where there was plaster, they repainted it, and where there was wood, they stained it. So our efforts to keep this house standing after 400 years are ongoing. This literally was finished this morning. So that's why I haven't had a chance. I don't want to hang the paintings on the wet stain. So yeah, the ongoing efforts to maintain the Fairbanks house. And that's what you need. It's 400 years old. It's made of wood. New England is not exactly the best place for that sort of thing. But we've managed, the Fairbanks family and the professional curators they brought in and the experts that those professional curators have brought in have done a lot of work to maintain this, and that's a big part of why it's still here. So, like I said, well built, well taken care of, luck. Those are our three main driving forces here at the Fairbanks house. So this is the Fairbanks house somewhere around 1890, 1895, from East Street. You can see dirt road, and you can also see wooden fence. As soon as that guy drove his car through the wooden fence, after they fixed the east switch, so the car went through like right about here, 60 years later than this photograph. But the car went through right about there, destroyed this fence. So they fixed the house and then put up a stone wall. That's why that stone wall is there. So the next car that loses their brakes hits the stone wall and hopefully stops before it gets to the house. So that's the stone wall. This is a picture from last year's family reunion. That's with a bunch of people hanging out. The Fairbanks continues. Like I said, 20 years, 18 years now, till we are actually 400 years old. So, the oldest wooden structure standing in North America. There are things older, but they're made out of stone or clay. Yes?
Have you ever had termites in the house?
They are a constant concern. There was a significant infestation, I believe it was in the 70s. They actually had to tent the house. And then they found the main infestation was in the main beam of the hall chamber, so one of the upstairs rooms. And so if you take a tour of the house, you'll see that beam in the hall chamber has these weird circular cutouts. And what they actually had to do It was so bad that they drilled holes in the beam, packed it with termite poison, and then plugged the holes. And so yeah, we've had termites. That's pretty much our two biggest threats to this house. Would be fire, but luckily there's minimal electricity, and we check the wiring and stuff. So fire would be very bad for this all wood building. But the thing we have to deal with more constantly is insects, because termites are not the only thing that eat wood. Actually, one of our more recent issues is what are called carpenter bees, which I had no idea these were a thing until I was taking care of a wooden house like this. They will bore perfectly round holes in the side of your building, and there have been a few holes in the side of the Fairbanks house I've had to patch up because of those carpenter bees. But we do have a pest company we work with to keep them away from the house as much as possible.
What,
Yeah.
was it built with a thatch roof or with a shingle roof?
From our understanding and from the construction of the original roof, it was always meant to be shingled. We don't think it could have, but it's unlikely it ever had a thatch roof. So it was built with shingles. And that is fairly standard. East Anglican construction never used thatch roof, it was always shingled. So that does actually work.
And they were attached with nails.
Yeah, so again, the frame is not nailed together,
Right, I
but
understand
things that are, so the shingles and the clapboards would have been attached with nails.
Well,
And they would have been replaced roughly every 20, 30 years.
How did they make nails, since we didn't have iron?
We did actually. We have one of the first things that was established in the Boston area was the Saugus Iron Works.
And they would
And then there were Lowell Iron Works as well back then. In fact, actually, the fourth child of Jonathan and Grace, the founders and the builders of the house, or the people that had the house built, it's just talking about they didn't build it. Their fourth child, Jonas, made a living in his 20s at the Lowell Iron Works. So yeah, knowing how important nails and other iron things were, that was one of the first things the Puritans did when they founded Boston, was establish an iron foundry. And so yeah, they have nail, and then Dedham. So Dedham was sort of in much the same way Boston was. It was the design community. 30 Puritan families got together, founded this town of Dedham. They wanted to call it contentment, right? So they made a point of having everything they needed, and they did have a blacksmith. So he would take that iron made from Lowell or Saugus, and he's the guy who would make nails and axe heads and plows and that kind of thing. And the problem was, of those 30 families, they quickly realized they didn't have a guy who could build spinning wheels. Right? What can Jonathan do? He can build spinning wheels. So that's how he gets into town. How the Fairbanks get in is they missed a critical skill set, and Jonathan had it. And at least he was Puritan-ish. That's another talk. Yeah, so happy to answer some more questions, but first, my contact info, if anybody has any longer questions they want answered. Our next talk will be here on June 6th at 7 p.m. Myths and Misconceptions about the Fairbanks and New England History. The Fairbanks is open May through October, so we just opened like 2 days ago. 1 day ago. I'm already losing track. Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 5, tours around the area. Last tour is at 4. You are at the library right now. The library has passes that get you buy one, get one into our museum and many other great museums.